Exercise Theory, Chapter 11, Leadership. What makes a great fitness leader? A great fitness leader is going to have a combination of the proper personality traits and skill set. We could use the acronym HEART to describe these. It would stand for happiness, empathy, artistic skills, rapport, and teaching skills. We'll discuss these individually. The first one is happiness. It's really important that you are happy in what you do, that you're passionate about what you do. You need to believe in the importance of what we're doing. You need to have a passion and drive to make a change in people's lives, to positively affect their health, their fitness levels, as well as their social emotional needs. So it's very important that you're happy and that you express this happiness, that you look happy and joyful to be there, that you seem excited about the class as opposed to the one that's complaining that they're tired. Remember, you serve as a role model for these people in the class. They look up to you to be inspired, to know that the hard work is worthwhile, and that's your job to be happy for them. So the second letter for our HEART acronym is E for empathy. Empathy is defined as the ability to experience another person's world. You need to remember that as a fitness leader, you already have become successful as a fitness individual, that you have developed a base fitness level and an enjoyment for activity. It's important that you remember not everybody is where you are at, that for some individuals it is very nerve-wracking and scary to enter a fitness class, or they also might have a very low fitness level and might be embarrassed by this, or simply they might struggle with it. If you are an empathetic leader, you will understand these struggles that other people are experiencing. Perhaps you yourself have never had that problem or experience, but you should be able to imagine what it would be like for them. So when you are working with beginners, that you welcome them, that you make sure that they're comfortable asking questions, that they know that you could serve as a resource, that when you're programming, that you're making your program appropriate for their level. So once again, if it's a beginner, you're not making it such a complex fancy routine that they're going to fail at. That, you know, if they've never done this before and you're doing a choreographed class and you have a very difficult routine, they're not going to do well at that, and that is going to make them feel poorly about themselves. If you're an empathetic leader, you would understand that and you'd be able to see that. And as a result, you'd be able to be flexible in your programming, that you would know that you might have intended on using a fancy choreographed routine, but seeing who's in the class, you might be able to be empathetic enough to realize that it wouldn't be an appropriate one for this situation. Other things too that I've always found useful about empathy is, once again, remembering that they might have embarrassment about fitness levels. Where I used to teach for years, we would teach level 1 classes, and the rule with a level 1 class is that the instructor always had to wear a full t-shirt, so they couldn't just show up in skin tight, spandex clothing. They needed to wear a looser t-shirt because the owner felt that in a beginner class especially, that you'd have more deconditioned individuals that might be more body conscious or body aware and embarrassed about their lack of fitness. So she felt in that situation that having a trainer that is showing off their super fit, ripped body might make these people more uncomfortable. So those type of examples are ways that we can be empathetic to improve the experience of somebody else. The next one we'll look at is artistic skills. So it's important to be artistic in what you do, that you develop classes and programs artistically, that you have some creativity, so you make things more interesting, more novel ideas, that you have variety. We we want to make sure that we always have those base elements to a class, but once we have those base elements, how can we play with variety? How can we make it seem a little bit different and a little bit more interesting to keep the interest of participants? Perhaps you reorganize the layout of the room itself, that if you normally all face the front of the room, maybe you have people set up in a circle. Perhaps you change the order of the exercises. Perhaps you change the music. And spice as well. So same thing. We're trying to make things seem exciting. We're trying to keep people's attention. And also keep their focus too. We don't want them to kind of become robotic about what they're doing, where they're no longer focusing on technique. We want to make sure that they are engaged and that they're really interested in what's going on. So as long as you keep those base elements of a class together, you could play around with some of that variety. It's extremely important to develop rapport, that you have an understanding and a relationship with the people that attend your class, that you're positive, that you're genuine, non-judgmental, that you're honest and open. I have found rapport is one of the most important elements in my own class, that I develop this relationship where my participants are comfortable sharing pertinent information that I need to know, especially health or fitness-related information, but they're comfortable to do that. As well as I find that it creates more of a bond, that they all of a sudden, when I have good rapport with them, that they feel also accountable to me. And I mean that in the sense that they don't want to miss a workout because they feel like, not that they're letting me down, but they feel like they should be there. They feel like they belong, that they feel like they're part of a group, and their role in that class is an important role. So therefore they feel like they should be there, accountable to, say, me and the participants in the class. And it's to develop that rapport, like we mentioned, you have to be non-judgmental, accepting that we all come from different backgrounds, that we all have different goals. This is the same thing as having that empathy, making sure that they feel that, as well as being honest and open. Once again, individuals are intimidated by fitness leaders, and when you are able to be honest and share a little bit of your own personal background and a little bit of your own personal struggles, it means a lot to the people taking the class. It makes you seem more human, more approachable. It also makes what you've obtained more obtainable to them, because they might be able to relate to you or see themselves in you and your own challenges. And it's also very important to remain positive with this rapport. So we want to make sure that we're very encouraging and open. The last letter for our acronym of HEART, answering what makes a great fitness leader, is the letter T for teaching skills. This is that ability to teach someone. This is what we're teaching you at the Manitoba Fitness Council to be able to do. This is to know your safety points about exercises and how to properly instruct the exercises to keep the individual safe. You'll learn how to observe somebody correctly, so know what you're looking for when you're observing exercise movement. We'll teach you how to correct people. So if there is a problem in their technique or their form, how do we correct them? What words do we need to say to them? What cues do they need to hear to be able to correct their movement? And finally, when it comes to teaching skills, it's also that ability to be punctual, prepared, and professional. It's hard for people to commit to fitness habits, and there's nothing worse than when they arrive on class on time and the instructor is not ready to go, or they don't respect the participants' time. So really being punctual, showing up prepared, knowing what you're going to do with the class and what you're going to use as a backup plan. I always have a little bit of backup plan in mind, just in case my advanced class turns out to be more of a beginner class. And it's incredibly important to be professional. This is a job. This is what you're doing. You need to respect the people that you're training, respect your colleagues, and respect yourself as well. You're not speaking derogatory about anybody, any individual, and you're keeping in mind that happiness, the empathy, your artistic skills, as well as your rapport. Now we're going to discuss different types of leadership styles. There are three main groupings of leadership styles: authoritarian, democratic, and laissez-faire. And we'll describe these each individually. However, they have different focuses, they have different styles, obviously. They're intended for different styles of participants. Uh, and we will talk about them in isolation, but it's important to realize that these leadership styles are used best in combination so that you're not just using one style with every class that you teach. That instead you learn that you might be more authoritarian in one situation, whereas in the next situation you might be more democratic or more laissez-faire. You need to be able to look at each individual situation and each individual class to determine the best style of leadership for these individuals. The first one is the authoritarian style. Now, this one's I always picture in my mind a dictator, and it's not quite that harsh. However, with this style of teaching and leadership, it's a one-way style of communication. So the instructor, the leader, is going to lead the class based on information, facts, and proper technique. They will stand in the class and they will say, you do this, 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 and this. It's arguably, it's not that they do not value the opinion of the participants, so it's not mean that they believe that the participant's opinion has no value, but rather it's not necessarily taken into account. So when they create the class, they are really working on the best needs of the majority of individuals in the class. So they are leading, they're not looking for input. They're not saying, oh, would we rather do squats or lunges, or oh, we have a little bit extra time, do we want to do extra stretching or abdominals? They're not acting that way. Rather, this leader is going to instruct and just simply tell participants what to do and then correct what they're doing. Now, although it sounds like it's a harsh way of instructing, it is an efficient and effective way of instructing both beginners and large groups. So if you have a very large group of individuals, sometimes being more democratic can be challenging because some people will want to do one thing and someone will want to do another thing and then someone will want to do something else. And if it's a large group, it's sometimes easier for the instructor simply to make that decision for the group. The other subset of the population that does well with authoritarian are beginners. You cannot have someone who's never done a squat or a lunge and ask them which they would rather do, or else look for their feedback before they know what they're giving feedback on. As a beginner, these individuals want to go to a class, be told what to do and how to do it safely. Once they have some knowledge, that's a different story, but before they have knowledge, this is the best way to teach them. So authoritarian is good with very large groups as well as beginners. So the next style of leader is the democratic. And so these ones will consider more what the participants' goals, needs, past experiences, and opinions. So this is in a class where I might go get insight on what they would rather do, or what would they prefer, or how many more of these can we do, and you're interacting more. It's a little bit more of a two-way communication in the democratic. Like it says here, it's important and useful when the participants already have knowledge and some existing fitness skills. I find this democratic style works well in more the medium style classes, because if you also have a very large class, and especially if they're newer individuals that you don't always see, if you all of a sudden start looking for a ton of feedback, they might not be comfortable in the middle of class hollering back what they prefer to do. They need to have a certain level of rapport with you before they're willing to do that. So democratic will take into account what the participants want to be doing at that point in time. The final type of leader is a laissez-faire. And so this is an indirect style of facilitation. So this is where the leader does not provide direct instructions, but waits to see what the participant is interested in doing, and then the leader will respond to their needs. This one will not work very effectively with a true beginner, because the beginner doesn't know what they want or need to be doing in the first place. They're going to need an authoritarian style leader to tell them what to do. These are individuals are usually they're very advanced, okay, or not very advanced, I shouldn't say that, but they definitely have experience. They know the different types of exercises. They know these things, and they might be looking at you just to give them a little bit of guidance in which direction to go in. Another time you'll see laissez-faire can be something like a running group, right? Where, maybe as a leader you're going, all right, you guys, we're heading out, we're running 3 miles a day, let's get out there, let's get going. And then you let the individual choose their pace, or whether they're doing a walk-run combo. That would be a lot more of a laissez-faire. The other way I also see laissez-faire lots of times is if you are more monitoring a weight room. So maybe you're more of a weight room monitor, where individuals show up and you're assisting them with exercises, but you're not standing at the front of a room teaching them. So like I said initially, in the real world, we combine these three systems, okay? So maybe when I structure class, maybe the majority of the class I'm authoritarian. I'm saying, look, this is what we're doing, this is how many we're doing, this is what's going on. But then at the end of class, we might get to abdominals, and I might be like, what do we feel like doing? Do we want to do more this or this? And I'll give them some options. So I might do a combination. Or else I might have a class that's a lot more democratic with even a little bit of laissez-faire, where all of a sudden you have an individual that doesn't want to do push-ups, so they're choosing to do chest press instead. Or, they might modify a lot more things. So you really need to read your group, and you need to be able to fluctuate and adapt as needed. A lot of the participants that you will end up working with in the fitness industry will be adults. Manitoba Fitness Council does have a youth certification. However, majority that you'll probably encounter will be adults. Adults are not the same as children, and if we're trying to treat an adult learner like a child, you're gonna end up with resistance from the adult, and the adult might be potentially offended. So here we have 7 principles of how adults will learn. So the first 2 imply that the adult must want to learn, and they'll only learn what they feel they need to learn. So it's really important that you communicate to them why they should be interested in learning, why it should be important to them. Now, you don't phrase it like that, to go, this should be important to you, but rather explaining the benefits of health, explaining the benefits of being more physically active and how that can impact health. Sharing information that way, which can intrigue an adult into wanting to learn more. So, there's health benefits with accumulating a minimum of 150 minutes per week. Oh, how can I do that? How can I accumulate more time? That, being able to do squats can help with your functional independence, your functional independence. Oh, well, what's so great about squats? Why do I need to be able to do them? And you see that by creating a potential knowledge gap, that allows them to actively try to find those resources and those answers. So we really must inspire them. The next one, number 3, is that adults will learn by doing. So, you could sit up there talking about all these things as much as you want, but you have to let them actually participate. And I find children are the same. It's that learn by doing. Adults do like to focus on problems, and they must be realistic problems. So something that they can fix, something that they feel like they have control over. So if things are presented to them as being too large, too unobtainable, it's not going to help them learn to deal with it. So focus on problems, also too, like in the sense of goals. Everything has to be realistic. They should feel like they can make a change. Experience will definitely affect adult learning, both positive and negative. So if someone's tried to go to a fitness class in the past and it's been a very negative experience, they really didn't enjoy it, they got injured, they were embarrassed by it, whatever reason, that's going to affect how receptive they are in the future. So know that each participant that comes into into your program is coming in with their own unique history and experience, and that you need to be able to be aware of this and to be able to adapt, to understand where they're coming from. Adults will also learn best in a more informal situation. So remember, this isn't school. It's not like when you're presenting information to them and teaching them that you're lecturing them or bossing them around, but rather it's informal. It's you are equals. You know, it's not like you're up on some pedestal and they're down below, but you're equals. And you keep it informal. You keep it light. And then adults want guidance. It's similar in the sense, too, that we're not talking at them, but rather we're helping them get towards their goals. We're assisting them. We're being aware of what they want and what they need and how to move them in the correct direction. So we're going to shift now a little bit to this concept of communication. There could be a host of problems when communication breaks down. So the better we can understand how communication works, the better we can make sure that we communicate properly with people, that we find a way to make sure the message gets through. So in the simplest sense, information is going in by the sender encoding something. So somebody sends a message, it encodes, and it sends a message, okay, to a receiver. The receiver shall receive the message and decode it, and they are going to react as per what they've received. However, that message, to get to the receiver, has to go through noise. It has to go, and you have to factor in the noise that's experienced. I'm not just talking about audible noise where you could be distracted, but also noise as what the receiver's thinking in their mind, what they're perceiving. There can be a lot of flaws that the information that the sender is sending, they might not encode it properly, that the noise might be too overwhelming to the message, or that the receiver decodes it or interprets it incorrectly. If you do a proper feedback loop and a proper communication loop, that receiver will send feedback to the sender who, if they are paying attention and are aware, they might find that there was an error somewhere along the lines, that they perhaps encoded things incorrectly, or that they were decoded differently than intended. So always remember that this is a very fluctuating, moving kind of scenario, that it's a lot of give and take, that there's two ends. It's not simply enough to say, oh, I said it, but rather, how did I say it? Was it too hard to receive the message? How did the receiver decode it? How did that participant hear what I was saying? And, you know, maybe something that was not intended to come off as rude or insulting, maybe in the decoding was, and how you can keep that full feedback loop going so that you could be aware that something might have gone wrong and you can correct it. So there's two major types of communication, or forms of communication: verbal and nonverbal. Verbal communication are our words or a tone of voice. And although we tend to put the most weight and importance on this type of communication, it actually will only account for 7% of our message. So 7% of what we're saying is coming from our actual words that we're using. Whereas our nonverbal communication, that's going to constitute the majority of the communication. That will be things such as our gestures, our posture, our facial expression, our eye contact and movement, or our body language. You've all seen this in some way or shape or form, that you've had somebody saying one thing, yet you're interpreting something else, where they might say, oh, this is so much fun, I'm having a wonderful time, yet they're not making eye contact, they're yawning, they look bored, they aren't looking engaged with spending time with you. Or else, you've also experienced it where you've had somebody say something that in and of itself may not be perceived as offensive, yet there was something about the way that they gestured or they postured themselves that you took what may not have been a rude comment in the words as offensive anyways, in the way that they were presented to you. So really what's going to happen is you're going to say words, but then that nonverbal communication is going to go to the receiver. The receiver will receive it, will take it in, will interpret it, will decode it, and then they will react to it. And so as you are choosing your words carefully when you are teaching and presenting and interacting with individuals, you also must make sure that you do your nonverbal communication, pay as much attention to that, and communicate that effectively as well. So general tips. So we're talking about teaching adults and talking to adults. So it's important that you remember that just because they are a learner, it doesn't mean that they are not intelligent or that they are potentially stupid, right? So you want to speak to them like they are adults. They're not children. They don't need easy words or short sentences. They are adults. And you have to speak to them, not at them. Like, once again, they're looking for guidance. They're looking for informal. They're not looking to be lectured by you as an instructor. You want to make sure to keep your tone light and very approachable. You want to be smiling as you're talking. You want to be standing in an open kind of posture. You want to be looking at them as you're talking with them. And it's important to remember that the words you choose matter. So words that you might not find offensive, other people do. And that, you need to be aware too, is that certain slangs might not be understood by everyone. That if you're working with individuals where English is their second language and you're using a lot of slang or a lot of phrases that they might not be familiar with, you're going to make that harder for them. Or else, if you're working with, I do find with older adults that, they might take offense to something that a younger group wouldn't, right? Especially inappropriate words, some of the slang words that we use might cause offense. So just be aware of that. Before you choose to say anything, think, could somebody find this offensive? Could somebody decode this in a way that would make them feel poorly about themselves or that they would find offensive? So really be aware of what you're choosing to say. So why don't participants hear what's being said? Why, despite your best efforts, does it appear that the message is not getting across to them? The first reason can simply be noise. Perhaps in a group fitness setting, you have the music on too loud. Perhaps they cannot actually hear what you're saying because they hear the music or the bass line to the music too loudly. Or maybe it's your microphone is too quiet so that the music is too loud above it or the background noise is too loud to block what they're hearing. Those would be easy corrections. That would be easy simply to turn down the music a little bit or to turn up the microphone if required. Understanding that more volume is not always better, but if perhaps the microphone was simply set too low. Other things that can happen with noise is that you might have participants within the class that are communicating with each other. So they might be conversing amongst each other and therefore somebody else can't hear. If that is the case, then it's worthwhile to politely ask for people to be a little bit quieter so everyone can hear the proper cues and instructions. If asked nicely, I've never had any problem with people complying with that. If you ask nicely, they're usually very agreeable if they understand why. Other things that could prevent them from truly hearing what you're saying can be your delivery, right? So perhaps they're distracted by your voice itself or the tone that you're using. Perhaps it's your body language or maybe your appearance or movements. So you might be talking, but you might also be tidying up the class or setting up equipment, which is distracting them. They're not paying attention. Or another one I find myself quite guilty of because I taught for years wearing a headset microphone. I have this terrible tendency now of believing somebody can hear me when I have my back turned to them. So that might simply be in the delivery or arguably the noise. If I'm not facing someone as I'm trying to speak to them, they might not hear me. Or perhaps with a combination of those two, perhaps the individual is positioned too far back. Maybe they're too far away from the speakers, or they're too far away from you if you're teaching without a microphone. So it might simply be a distance thing, which allows other noise to interfere. Other reasons why they might not hear what you're saying is the language that you chose. If they are brand new to fitness and anatomy and they've never been to a fitness class, and you're talking about, all right, let's do some eccentric training for latissimus dorsi and working our gluteus maximus and your rectus femoris, and you're throwing all of these words out and they don't even know what you're talking about. They don't recognize your language that you're using. So you want to make sure it's appropriate, and if you are going to choose to use these fancier, more correct terms, you simply explain what they are. Oh, your latissimus dorsi, this is your big back muscle, and you could indicate with your hand where that muscle is. So these are ways that we could overcome language. The other issue simply can be is that they do not speak the language you speak very well. When I work with individuals that have English as a second language and limited experience with English, I choose extremely simple words. I choose only the most pertinent words and as basic of a word as possible. And I also strongly rely on visual cues. So instead of standing there telling them what a squat looks like, I will visually do the squat so they can actually see that as I'm saying only the most important cues and indicating. So language itself can be. Another issue can be message overload. Perhaps you're throwing too much information at them, that it's just too much, you're speaking too rapidly, you're doing too many cues. So once again, let's say they're squatting and they're trying to squat. They've never squatted. And you're like, all right, abs in, chest up, eyes directly forward. Sit the hips back, drive the weight through the heels. Keep the weight out of the toes. Make sure that the knees do not go beyond the toes. Stick the hips back, drive the chest up, drive the hips forward. Now squeeze those glutes, eyes up, chin up. They're just simply not going to know what's happening. Now, if it's a seasoned individual who's very comfortable with squats, they might be fine with that type of cueing. But if you could simplify it and be like, abs engaged, chest up, sit your hips back. Well, that's all of a sudden not too much information. So now all of a sudden they can understand that, they can hear what you're saying. So be aware of that. I usually choose as few of cues as possible to avoid this message overload. I don't want too many words happening all at once. And the final reason why they don't necessarily hear what's being said is their own perception, so the way that they perceive the message. And this you don't necessarily have control over, so you can't determine necessarily how they're going to perceive the message. But if you are doing two-way communication and being an active communicator with the individual, you will usually be able to see that something's going wrong in the interpretation. So when you're saying something and you don't mean any offense by it, and not just mean any offense, but even the words you're choosing should not be offensive, but all of a sudden they seem offended, or you're thinking you're saying something very clearly and they seem very confused. If you are being active and observing this and taking the feedback just simply by visually watching, you can correct for this. You would know something wasn't going quite right, and you could therefore change how you handle it. Another concept to be aware of that makes a lot of what we do in this industry is unique is that as an instructor and a fitness leader, you are both a participant and an observer. So quite frequently when we're teaching, you're an active participant in the program you are teaching. So while you are trying to teach and observe people and correct people, you're often also participating in there. And that's especially true, I find, with the choreographed classes. So those that'll do step classes or high-low classes, or actually spin classes as well, that you're actively participating while observing. And so it is a skill. It's a very important skill to work on, to be able to do both at once. My number one advice for everyone is that although you're an active participant in the class that you're teaching, please remember it's not your workout. This is not, yes, you do get the added benefit of health benefits from exercise for teaching a class because you're physically moving. But if you really treat that class that you're teaching as your workout, then the odds are is you're not paying close enough attention to what your participants are doing. If you're lifting weights that are heavy enough to challenge you and make you focus on your own form, you probably will be unable to focus on theirs. So I've always taught below my own abilities. So if I could lift a certain amount of weight in shoulder press, if I'm teaching a class, I'm going to be lifting less than I normally can lift, so that I could both serve as an example. So they could say, oh, that's how she's doing shoulder press. That's what the movement looks like. So that helps those that are very visual in learning. But it also allows me to be able to focus my attention on what the participants are doing. So I don't have to focus quite as much on what I do. So it's very much an art form in how we work that. So feedback, the good and the bad. We love feedback when it's good, and yet it can hurt when it is bad. Feedback can be done very casually, where you simply ask, hey, how was the class? How did you enjoy that? Or it can be done much more officially, where you have them fill out feedback information, where they might fill out forms, etc. The thing with feedback is it's going to let you know if you really are communicating. So as I've already mentioned in this unit, that if you're doing very casual feedback simply by watching their responses to how you say things, that could provide you with some. Or else it can also be a matter of an individual at the end of the class. I usually will say at the end of the class, thank you for coming. If you have any feedback, please come let me know, okay? Feel free to approach me. It can be challenging. Some feedback, you can't use all feedback. So for every individual that wants the music a little bit louder in classes, there's usually also another individual who wishes the music was turned down a little bit. So it's difficult to please everyone. Some people will like more weight, some people will like a little bit more time spent on cardio. So you have to understand we can't please everybody all the time. That's impossible. On certain things, it's nice maybe if you fluctuate. So if one half of the group loves country and the other half loves pop music, maybe you're alternating the type of music that you use. Maybe you're also in receiving the feedback, and you should receive it graciously. So you shouldn't say, no, this is why your feedback is wrong. That's not what I'm saying. But when somebody says, oh, I wish our music was louder, can we turn the music up louder? You might go, you know what, I understand how you would want more louder music. That's understandable. However, quite a few of the participants find that it affects their hearing, and it's hard on their hearing with it much louder. So if you could communicate appropriately with somebody. Sometimes feedback is pertinent and useful, and sometimes it's not. You will come across participants that might just nothing makes them happy, and they might be cruel for no good reason. A girl I taught with for years got the feedback once that her voice was just screechy and awful. Well, what are you supposed to do with feedback that your voice is screechy and awful? To make a little side point, she did actually watch to make sure that she did little tweaks to her voice to see if she can make it a little bit less screechy, but at the end of the day, that's simply who she is. So, there's some things that you might not be able to help with. They might criticize you that they hate doing squats and you shouldn't do squats, but at the end of the day, that's not really going to be useful because you're still going to choose to use squats. So it's really a balancing act. You want to always respect their opinion, because even if you perceive their opinion as right or wrong, it still is theirs. It is their opinion. It's what they believe. So be aware of that. And the last thing is make sure not to gossip about other leaders. So, when they come up and like, oh, I don't like Susie's class, and Susie does this, and Susie does that, and I can't stand it when Susie does this. You need to be you need to be professional, and maybe perhaps suggesting going, oh, perhaps that's information that Susie might find useful, or perhaps if you communicate that to Susie and encourage things that way. You know, you need to remember, for the most part, for everybody that might think something's wrong with Susie's class, there's a lot of other participants that will like her class. So be a professional and think about how you would feel if a participant was discussing you behind your back with another leader. How would you want that leader to handle things? So once again, you're not allowed to say, no, that's terrible and wrong and awful of you. You shouldn't do that either, but simply maybe finding a better outlet for what their criticisms are. So maybe that individual can approach the leader with problems. And the last comment on that too is that, if they're criticizing another class, you need to remember you're not in the class, that you might not have seen the class, and what the leader said, the participant that's complaining may have misinterpreted. They might have decoded the message incorrectly. So before you just go and you throw another leader under the bus, you should realize that you weren't there. Okay? So our last thing is just general discussion points. So remember, what will make a good fitness leader? And the acronym is HEART. Happiness, empathy, artistic skills, rapport, and teaching skills. The different leadership styles you'll want to remember are authoritarian, democratic, and the laissez-faire one. And that authoritarian tends to work better with more beginner individuals or extremely large groups, and especially if the large group changes all the time. So if it's more of maybe you're in a fitness facility, so every class it's a different group. Authoritarian tends to work a little bit better with that one. Democratic is great for people that have experience, and laissez-faire is definitely for those that have experience. They already know what's happening. And at the end of the day, you want to have a variety of different styles, okay? And you're going to adapt them to each group. And finally, with feedback, so informal and formal. So informal can be simply asking people's opinion or watching reactions, or else if you are looking for formal feedback, you might choose to have them fill out a questionnaire or a little survey, or any kind of question thing that will give them a chance to use specific answers and really specifically say how they feel about something.